Hello there and welcome to Bot101. I'm Angela Nishimoto. Okay, today we're going to be doing the last show. Okay, and we're going to be doing the flowering plants and civilization part 2, a survey of some of the plant families and the flowering plants. Okay, so the first group that we're going to talk about today are the Cactaceae, or the cactus family. Okay, so you can see here from this image that the cactus has a swollen stem that is green. So what does it mean when the stem is green? It means that the stem does photosynthesis, right? Because it has the pigment chlorophyll in it that does photosynthesis. And the leaves are here at these nodes, okay? And the leaves are adapted to actually make spines, okay? So cactus are native to the Americas, okay? And another interesting thing, that even if the plant itself is attractive, you know, with its kind of lurid looking spines on it, but it also has beautiful flowers, okay, showy flowers. And the flowers have numerous sepals, petals, and stamens, okay? And the inferior ovary that cactuses have develops into a berry. Okay, and most cacti are edible. Okay, so you're looking at a showy flower here on what looks like a kind of barrel cactus. Okay, so the cactus family are more than 1,500 species in the drier subtropical areas of the Americas. Okay, well, we just talked about the leaves of many are reduced to spines, not all of them, but many of them, most of them in fact. And their fleshy stems do the photosynthesis, okay? Of course, since they're living in those areas that they live in and the way they're built, they can tolerate high temperatures, okay? And some actually, they can live without water for years. That's amazing, okay? And they vary in size from pinhead size to giant saguaro, which can go up to 50 feet. And weigh more than 5 tons. And most cactuses are slow growing. Okay, I have a few at home, not a big one like this. You can see how big they can get, right? Now cacti, okay, of course, in their stems, they store water. In 1944, a Marine was forced to bail out over the desert near Yuma in Arizona. Okay, what did he do? He was by himself. Okay, he was out there in the desert by himself. He managed to survive the desert heat and the aridity of the desert by actually getting into barrel cacti and chewing the pulp of these cacti. And he actually lived and survived to tell his tale and was rescued 5 days later. Okay, so most cacti have edible fruits, and one of the edible fruits that cacti have is called the dragon fruit. Okay, of course you also have the prickly pear cacti, but there are 3 cacti that are poisonous, okay, that are known to be poisonous. You have the peyote, which we talked about before. You have another cactus called the living rock cactus, or the living rock, and you have the hedgehog cactus. Okay, so these 3 cacti are known to be poisonous, right? Now, the fruits of prickly pear cactuses are sometimes sold in the United States in supermarkets, in the United States markets. Now, here's what happened in the mid-1800s. Australians, some people thought it was a good idea to plant a few prickly pear cacti out in the desert in Australia. Okay. Now, the thing is that these cacti had no natural enemies in Australia because, of course, in Australia, that wasn't a place where they had evolved in, whereas in the Americas, that's where the cacti developed. So they actually evolved along with some natural enemies that would actually prey upon them, lay their eggs in them, eat them, okay? So these prickly pear cacti infested more than 60 million acres of land in Australia within 75 years, a disaster, okay? Another man-made disaster, okay? So in 1925, they introduced a moth that was known to be able to control the prickly pear cacti. The moth probably laid its eggs, okay, in the fruit, or into the cactus, and the larvae probably fed on the cacti and kind of did that. Okay. So you also have, so here's some prickly pear cacti. You can see the red fruits here, which are edible. If they're anything like dragon fruits, which I have tasted, they are probably very tasty, or at least a little tasty. I think they have a lot of water in them. Okay. Now the prickly pear cacti are also known as opuntia, and the opuntia was also introduced into Hawaii. Okay. So here's a look at opuntia with its fruits on it. All right, and one of the reasons why they actually spread so much, they actually infested a lot of the dry lands in Hawaii, because at one time, okay, the cattle were kapu. They had a kapu placed upon them. Okay, so cattle actually wandered around, could eat anything they wanted to, so they ate a lot of native plants. And you had opuntia, you had the koahale, the Lucina leucocephala that we talked about before, growing in these dry areas, which they still do actually go, but for both plants, they introduced some kind of natural predator on them, and they were beaten back. Okay. Now peyote cacti are small, they're like button-like plants, and they have several drugs in them. Okay. So the most powerful of them is mescaline. Okay, it's a powerful hallucinogen. Okay. And the interesting cultural thing about peyote is dried peyote has been used in religious ceremonies in Mexico for thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years. And then subsequently, it's also used by at least 30 other Native American tribes in the Americas. Okay? So that's a cacti. And here's a peyote plant with this flower, very nice image. Okay? Now the next family we're going to cover are the mint family, also known as the Lamiaceae. Okay, here's a mint. Okay, they number about 3,000 species, and one of their distinguishing marks is they have angular stems that are square in cross section. Okay, so they have angular stems that are square. So the stem is kind of rectangular, not rectangular, but square in cross section. Okay, and they have opposite leaves, all right, and bilateral flowers. Okay, and most of the mint family have aromatic oils, but not all of them. Okay, so here's a look at a mint. Okay, here you can see the bilateral flowers. You can't really see the stem that well, but that's okay. Just know that the stem is square in cross section. Okay. It has a four-parted superior ovary, and each of these divisions of the ovary develops into a nutlet. Okay, and some of the mint family include some of our herbs that are very famous, like rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, marjoram, basil, lavender, catnip, peppermint, spearmint. Okay, so here we have rosemary, thyme, sage, some of the flowers are showing, which are good. Oregano flowers and fruits. Okay, marjoram, basil, lavender, and catnip. Okay, beautiful images. Okay. So the oils are the part that are usually medicinally used. Okay. The oils are also antiseptic. They're sort of like the oils that you find in eucalyptus plants. Okay. So what they are is they have menthol, okay, in some of the mint family, and the menthol is used in toothpastes, candies, chewing gums, liqueurs, and cigarettes. Okay, the menthol. Okay, and we have ornamentals, kind of very common ornamentals, the salvia and the coleus. Okay, they're also in the mint family. So these do not have the mint-like odor to them. Okay. Also, chia seeds come from mint family members. They're popular right now, okay, and they're gotten from a plant that's from the Western North America. Okay, chia seeds you can get at Whole Foods or other health food stores. Okay, so in Hawaii we have mintless mints because many plants have lost their ability to defend themselves after they came to Hawaii because they had no predators preying on them. So some of these are the Haplostachys species, the Philostagia species, and Cynogeny species. So you can see they're very lovely. So the mints in Hawaii are among the mintless mints. We also have nettleless nettles, or members of the Urticaceae that don't have the nettle sting to them. So many plants that actually came to Hawaii on their own and developed in Hawaii and speciated in Hawaii do not have defenses against browsers or things like cattle or horses or pigs, okay, because they evolved without them, okay? Now the next family we're going to cover are the nightshade family, the Solanaceae. Okay, so as a look at it, you can see the fused petals that they have. Okay, another part is that the filaments of the anthers are fused to the corollas. We'll see that in a second. So they have fused petals and filaments fused to the corolla. Okay, the superior ovary becomes either a berry or a capsule depending on the kind of plant it is. And there are more than 3,000 species in this family. Okay, they have alternate leaves, okay, and they may be herbs or shrubs or trees or vines, but remember it's generally the flower and the fruit characteristics that people actually use to delineate what plant goes into what family. So some members include tomato, white potato, eggplant, pepper, tobacco, petunia, and datura. So here, of course, is a tomato, you know, sort of like a very kind of favorite fruit of many, that is actually a fruit, actually not a vegetable, but it's a favorite so-called vegetable because, of course, legally it's a vegetable, but botanically it's truly a fruit, okay? Here's some petunias that we might not be so familiar with here in Hawaii because it tends to be a temperate area plant. And here's actually, it looks like a fruit of datura, okay? And datura will produce poisonous drugs. So many in the nightshade family produce poisonous drugs, okay? Not just that, but many people are actually allergic to members of the nightshade family. Okay, so there are lots of people who can't eat tomatoes or eggplant or white potato, okay? And so some of these poisonous drugs do have medicinal uses, okay? Such as the deadly nightshade, also known as belladonna, okay? It's actually the source of atropine, okay, which is used in pain relief, also used by eye doctors to dilute your pupils when they're investigating inside your eye, okay? There's also scopolamine, which is used as a tranquilizer. And there's also hyoscyanin, which is similar to atropine, okay? The deadly nightshade has been used as a poison, okay? But also used for cosmetic reasons by dilating pupils of women to make them look more kind of doe-like and feminine, okay? Now the pepper is also known as capsicum and also has a substance in it which is called capsicum, which is a gastric stimulant. Okay, it also has capsaicin, which is used as pain relief for pain medication for arthritis. It's like a cream that you apply topically. You can get from the pharmacy. Okay, and also there's a neuropathic pain. Okay, and here's a big one here: tobacco. Okay, which has nicotine in it. Nicotine is an addictive substance, so tobacco, of course, is very addictive, okay? And the nicotine is actually a poison. It's been used for insecticides. It's also been used for antihelminthics, and antihelminthics are a worm medication for intestinal worms. Okay, so you can actually deworm a person or deworm an animal with nicotine, okay? It's an addictive drug, okay, very bad. It can actually elevate your chances of getting heart disease and respiratory diseases, and of course, cancers, okay. Another thing about this nicotine is that it's so poisonous That's a heavy smoker. It's been said that a heavy smoker, if they get a leech on them, that the leech will actually die and fall off of them in 5 minutes due to the nicotine in the person's blood. Okay, kind of amazing. Okay. So the tomato is a popular vegetable, or actually a fruit. Okay, but most of the juice is used, or most of the tomatoes are used for juice and tomato paste and ketchup in the United States. Okay. Now the white potato, there's more than 357 million tons a year harvested. Okay. And the place where it grows the most is in, or it's grown the most, is in China, India, United States, and Russia. Okay. And it was originally sent from Peru by Spaniards, okay, to Europe in the 1500s. It's one of the riches that the Europeans took back with them from the New World. Okay. Now the interesting thing about them is that you know that potatoes, when you store potatoes, you usually store them in the cupboard, or you store them where it's someplace dark, right? Because potatoes will actually turn green if you leave them in the light. They'll actually start to photosynthesize. And when they turn green, they actually start to make a poisonous substance, which is called solanine. Okay? So the tubers turn green when it's exposed to light, and poisons are made in the green areas. Okay, so don't eat green potatoes. Okay, it's poisonous. Okay? Now so here's taking a look at the actual potato plant. So all other parts of the potato plant are poisonous. Only the tubers are the only things that people can eat. Okay, the leaves, the roots are quite poisonous. Okay? So remember, potato is in the nightshade family. There are some people who can't eat potato because of it. They're sensitive to chemicals that are produced in members of this family. Okay? Now then we also have a plant that is actually native to Hawaii, which is known as popolo. Okay? Solanum americanum. All right? So this is actually a medicinal plant of Hawaii. Okay? So actually I had a colleague, or I do have a colleague, who went overseas, okay, and she was getting a sore throat, you know, from travel when you're on an airplane for many long hours. I think she went to Asia from Hawaii, and she was getting a sore throat, and she thought, oh, in a couple of parking lots away from the hotel, I thought I saw popolo. So she thought popolo is good for alleviating cold symptoms. So what she did is she kind of walked to that parking lot, harvested a little popolo leaves, cleaned them, chewed them very well, and swallowed them. And then within hours, her sore throat was dissipated, that she lost her sore throat. So she averted a cold by taking popolo. Okay? So popolo is actually a medicinal plant that was among the chief medicinal plant in Hawaiian pharmacology. Okay? Okay, the next family we're going to talk about are the pumpkin family. Okay, they're also known as cucurbitaceae. Look at all those pumpkins and squashes. Okay, nice. Okay, make me feel hungry. Okay, so there are about 700 species, and there could be prostrate or climbing vines with tendrils. Okay, the flowers have fused petals, and the female flowers have inferior ovaries and 3 carpels. Okay, and they have unisexual flowers. Okay, so some of the plants are monoecious. That means you have male and female flowers in the same plant. Some of them are dioecious, so you have males in male plants and females in female plants. Okay, they include, oh, so here's a look at the flower of a pumpkin family member. Okay, so here you have a male flower on the top. You see there is no ovary, and here's a female flower on the bottom on a monoecious pumpkin plant. Okay, here you have the ovary swelling here. Okay, so this of course is a dioecious plant. Okay, so some of the members of this family include pumpkins, squashes, cucumbers, cantaloupes, watermelons, and gourds. Okay, so in Hawaii we're familiar with ipu. Okay, but here we have a pumpkin patch. We have a flower here with a pollinating squash bee, okay, or a couple of bees. Cucumbers and some gourds, aren't they attractive? Okay. So in Hawaii, we have the ipu, also known as Lagenaria ciceraria, okay? And the ipu has been used, okay, for Hawaiian musical instruments and hula instruments. Okay, some examples of them are the pa ipu. That's a big gourd that people would thump against their hand and against the floor when they're doing a seated hula or a chant, okay? Or the uli uli, which is like the rattle with the feathers on the top of it. Okay, we weren't really able to find images for these, unfortunately. And my mom used to take hula, but I gave away her hula instruments to a friend. I shouldn't have done that, but because I was going to take hula, but then it was too hard. So much work. Okay. Now the next group are the Asteraceae that we're going to get into. Okay, they're also known as a compositae. Okay. So the number about 20,000 species, or they are the second largest plant family in the numbers of species that they have. Okay. So individual flowers are called florets, and the florets are small and numerous and arranged in an inflorescence known as a head. Okay. So they actually look like a single flower. Okay, but they're all a bunch of small little florets all gathered together into an inflorescence known as a head. Okay, so lettuce, endive, chicory, Jerusalem artichoke, globe artichoke, dahlias, chrysanthemums, marigold, and sunflowers, thistle, and tarragon are different types of sunflower family members. Okay, so here's a romaine lettuce. Here's some endive, chicory, Jerusalem artichoke, dahlias, chrysanthemums or mums, and thistles. Okay, so chicory has been used as, I think, a coffee adulterant and substitute. Okay. And this is a chrysanthemum. Okay, and chrysanthemum are a source of pyrethrins. You see all these little structures in here? These are actually individual flowers, okay, or florets, right? So you have the ray florets, okay, that actually have the petals attached to them, okay? And you have the other florets more near the center, okay? Let's see, so we have marigolds. So the substance in the roots repels nematodes, okay? And the odor of the leaves of marigolds repels whiteflies and other insects. So some people like to make their annual garden, and they like to surround the garden with marigolds because they'll repel some insects, okay? Now dandelion, the young roots and the leaves are eaten. Okay, as you look at dandelion, you can see all the stigma sticking up. Okay, so flowers are used to make wine. Okay, now we have sunflower seeds. Here's a seed, here's a fruit. The fruit is called an achene. Okay, and this is actually the seed of the sunflower seed. And of course, this is what we eat. Okay, now we're getting into the monocots. Okay, let's see. So we have grass family, the Poaceae. Here's a grass with an inflorescences on them. Okay, they're also known as the Gramineae. Okay, the Poaceae and the Gramineae. Okay, and the flowers of this family are wind pollinated for the most part. Okay, so the calyx, which is made up of sepals, and the corolla, which is made up of petals, are reduced to mere scales. Okay, and the stigmas are feathery. The flowers are protected by bracts. Okay, the leaves sheath the stems. Okay, we have wheat. We have a grass plant here. Okay, the roots, the rhizome. Okay, which is a stem. The leaves sheathing the stem, and here you have the inflorescence. Okay, with a flowering inflorescence here. Okay. So wheat, barley, rye, oats, and corn. Okay, so this is wheat. Here's barley, here's rye, and here are some oats. Okay, these are all major crops. Okay, so there are more than 1 billion tons of cereals harvested every year worldwide, and it's mostly harvested in Asia and North America and Europe. So these different kinds of grasses are actually temperate area grasses. Okay. Now, sugarcane supplies 80%, approximately 80% of the whole sugar supply of the world. Okay. The sugarcane stalks can also often grows to 20 feet tall. Here's some sugarcane stems. Here you can see the nodes and the internodes. Okay. And of course, so sugarcane grows in lower elevations in tropical areas. Okay. And after the canes are harvested, okay, raw liquid sugar is milled out and the juice is centrifuged, and so the solids are separated, and the solids end up as table sugar, and the molasses is often used for making rum, okay, or alcohols, other alcohols. And of course, the sugarcane changed the history of Hawaii, okay, because of sugarcane plantations, the sugar plantations, people in Hawaii brought over people from Asia and other places like Puerto Rico. Okay, that's why we have one of our, a large number of ethnicities in Hawaii. Not just that, is the sugar plantations actually organized into organized labor, and organized labor was actually the reason, okay, for the rise of the middle class, okay, in the United States. Okay, because they gave working people a living wage. You could actually be doing manual labor and make enough money so that you could support your family. And of course, before, that wasn't true. That if you did manual labor, you probably were in debt for your whole life. In the 1800s and the 1700s, they had debtors' prisons where they would actually put people in prison or transport them. Sometimes they'd even hang them, if they were in debt. And even though there are so many poor people, that was the only way they could get, something to eat, was to actually borrow or actually get produce and like that from the company store. That song, 18 tons, and what do you get? And another year older and deeper in debt. So it actually was the unions that actually saved working people and gave rise to the middle class. Okay, remember that. Okay. Now in the grass family, the grasses are used for mats and baskets. Okay, if it weren't for the unions, we'd still all be on the plantations. Okay, so grass is also used for thatching houses. Okay, citronella is a plant that the oil was used as a mosquito repellent. Okay, now they're used for more inexpensive soaps and cosmetics and perfumes. Okay, lemongrass oil is used for the same purposes as citronella oil, and there are some grasses that are noxious weeds in Hawaii, such as California grass. Okay, now the lily family. Okay, in the lily family, they often have large flowers. Okay, they're the Liliaceae. Okay, and parts are in multiples of threes, and oftentimes sepals resemble the petals. Okay, they're called tepals, remember? Okay, when the sepals and the petals resemble each other. Okay, so they include the ornamental lilies and daffodils. They include asparagus, sarsaparilla, meadow saffron, okay, and aloe. Okay, so sarsaparilla has been used as a flavoring for drinks and medicine. Okay, and here are some different lily family members. There's canna here. Here's a daffodil. Here's a smilax with its fruits. Okay. Now, meadow saffron is a source of colchicines. Okay, colchicines used to be used by doctors for rheumatism and gout. Okay, now they're used by tissue culture people and other people in horticulture to make polyploid plants. You remember polyploid plants? That means that they have more than 2 sets of chromosomes. So all they need to do is get this colchicine and apply it to a part of a plant, and oftentimes that part of the plant will have disruption in mitosis. It interferes with spindle formation during mitosis. So what you end up with a plant that hasn't actually divided its chromosomes into 2 cells. Okay, so you can have polyploid plants from that, which is good. But colchicine is also a carcinogen, of course, if it interferes with mitosis and interferes with ploidy, because, of course, tumors in humans and other organisms are generally made of different ploidy of the cells. The cells have different ploidy. Okay, so it's dangerous to use colchicine, but that's how people get big flowers, big plants. Okay. Now, sansevieras are also known as mother-in-law's tongue. Okay, are houseplants. Notice that the leaves are large, broad, and they're pointed and they're hard. Okay. Now, aloe, the juice of the aloe is used. Here's a look at a leaf with the kind of like the sticky sap inside of it. Okay. So they're used in shampoos, cosmetics, sunburn lotion, and treatment of burns. Although people can be sensitive to aloe, as it can be sensitive to any plant, okay, because they have their own secondary compounds that people can be sensitive to. So they can be used externally for treatment of skin conditions and also burns, but they're also used internally for digestive problems. Okay, that's what I tried to do. I tried to take aloe for a digestive problem. Okay, and what had actually happened is I took these aloe capsules, took 2, and I started itching that night. But then the directions said to double the dose the next day, so I took 4 the next day, and I broke out in welts all over my body. And I was really sick. I had to take prednisone, the anti-inflammatory drug, to actually calm down that inflammation. Okay, so be careful whatever you take, okay? You never know what's going to actually cause a reaction, okay? Now, onions and garlic are edible, okay, members of the lily family, okay? And here they are, onions, some nice red onions, and here's some garlic, cloves here, over there on the right, okay? Now we're going to talk about the orchid family. Okay, also known as the Orchidaceae. Look at that variety in its flowers. Okay, in this family, there are more than 35,000 species. So this is the largest family of flowering plants by far. Remember that flowering plants only number about 250,000 species, 250,000 species, or a little bit more than that. But more than 35,000 of those species are actually orchid species. Okay, and from what you saw in that previous slide, the flowers are especially varied in size and form. And it's, of course, it's the orchid flower that we're interested in. Okay, their habitats are extremely diverse. They can live any place in the world except for deserts and the Arctic areas and Antarctic areas. Okay, they can live in the subarctic, they can live up on mountains, they can live by the ocean. Okay, they can live in cloud forests. Of course, that's where most of them are that we know about. Okay, the tropical cloud forests. Okay, now an angraecum flower may be 18 inches long. Okay, and here's an angraecum. Okay, it's actually a African orchid, a monopodial orchid, so it actually grows vertically in an upwards direction. You can see this long spur. So Charles Darwin, before he had died, he'd actually predicted that Angraecum sesquipedale would have a pollinator that's a moth that had 10 to 11 to 12 inch proboscis or tongue, because at the very tip of the spur is nectar, okay? And the flowers are sweetly scented, so this is like totally a moth-pollinated flower, and the scent is more apparent at night. Okay, and 50 years after Charles Darwin actually died, they actually found the moth that pollinated Angraecum sesquipedale. Okay, here's another Angraecum. Aren't they beautiful? My own private preference for flowers are white flowers and green flowers. That's my own private preference for flowers. I know that oftentimes they don't photograph that well. They're hard to photograph, and some people think that they're too bland, but myself, I like white flowers. White flowers and green flowers. Now, another kind of genus of orchid called Grammatophyllum, they may produce 10,000 flowers on a 15-foot spike. Okay? The plant can weigh more than 1 metric ton. Okay, so here's a grammatophyllum growing on a tree because it's an epiphyte, and you see how big it is, how long the pseudobulbs are, and also the flowering spikes. Okay. And here's a closer look at the flower. You can see it's sort of reptilian in what it looks like, but the mass of 10,000 flowers is surely lovely to behold. So this is Grammatophyllum speciosum. And now Rhizanthella gardneri grows and flowers underground. Here's a beautiful picture of Rhizanthella gardneri. So it's an Australian orchid that was discovered when a farmer was actually plowing up a field, and he found this plant, and he contacted a nearby university, and it was, of course, a plant new to science. And nobody had ever heard before of a plant that grows and flowers entirely underground. Its pollinators will actually burrow into the loose soil in which the flowers are. They're attracted by the smell. I think the flowers smell sort of like decaying animal matter. Yeah, so I think some kind of fly or some kind of beetle actually burrows into the soil and pollinates the flowers. Okay, very unusual flower, very desirable, of course, which makes you think that probably they protect it very much in Australia. Okay, because collectors, like art collectors, you know, people who collect plants, sometimes they're very ruthless. So the orchid family have flowers with 3 sepals and 3 petals. Okay. 1 petal of the 3 differs from the other 2. Okay, and that 3rd petal is called the lip or labellum. Okay, and the stamens and the pistil are united in a single structure known as a column. Okay, now the anther is at the tip of the column. Okay, and they have sacs of pollen that can be mealy or can be waxy, and these are called pollinia. Okay, and the stigma is a sticky depression on a column, like a concavity, further down on the column. Okay, and here's a look, and this is a Cattleya hybrid, probably. Okay. So here's 1 sepal, the dorsal sepal. Here's one lateral sepal. Here's the other lateral sepal. 3 sepals, 3 petals, 1 petal here, 1 petal here, and 1 petal here. The 3rd petal different from the other 2. And this is what they call the lip or labellum. Okay. And opposite the lip or labellum, here you have the column. You can actually see the anther cap on this image. Okay. Now, orchid family members have tiny dust-like seeds that are produced in large quantities. There can be up to 1 million seeds in a capsule. Okay, so some fruits can have 1 million seeds, and each seed is only a few cells large. Okay, so the seeds must associate with a mycorrhiza. Okay, not just that, is that the plant, if it does grow and is successful, it may take 6 to 12 years or more in order for the plant to flower. This is one of the reasons why orchids are expensive. If you go to a florist, or even if you go to an orchid nursery, they're higher priced than other plants. Part of it is because the nursery people need to actually take care of the plant for years and years and years before they flower, because most people won't buy an orchid when it's not in flower. Okay, so here's a look at cross sections of capsules. So you can see that they have 3 carpels, okay, making up the capsules. Okay, so these are cross sections. So it's like the fruit, you make a cross section of it, so you see that they're in 3s for orchids, and these are different kinds of orchids. You can see that they have many seeds. Okay. Very nice image. Okay. And of course, the orchid family has among the most beautiful and prized of flowers. Okay. I know I said that some people call the roses the queen of flowers, but some people call orchids the empress of flowers. Okay. So there's a large industry, okay, that has developed all over the world, in Thailand, in Taiwan, okay? And in the United States, of course, in Britain, in Australia, having to do with the culture and propagation of orchids. There are orchid societies. There are orchid judges that actually judge flowers. Okay, so here's a Paphiopedilum. Okay, so Paphiopedilums are from Asia. All right, the orchid from Asia. Here's a dorsal sepal. Here, I think these are the petals actually. These actually are the lateral sepals, and here's a lip with a column opposite it. Okay, now the vanilla orchid is a source of true vanilla. Okay, and here's a look at the vanilla orchid flower. I like this flower. Okay, so here's a dorsal sepal. Here's two of the lateral sepals, or the lower sepals. Okay, here's one of the petals. And here's actually part of the lip, okay, and here's a column, okay, attached to the ovary, okay. So here you have the anther with pollinia, okay. Here's a stigma, or the stigma here, which would be a concavity with sticky fluid in it in order to adhere the pollinia to it, okay. And when it's pollinated, the pollen would grow and grow its pollen tube into the ovary and then fertilize the egg, okay, and make seed, okay. Now there are 3 species of orchids that are native to Hawaii, okay, and that means that they got here on their own without the help of people. And they're all small orchids, probably less than just a few inches high. Okay, one of them is called Anectichylis sanvicensis. Okay, and here's a look at a nice photograph of it. This photograph taken by Dr. Lamoureux, who has passed away. He used to be the director of the Lion Arboretum and a professor in the botany department at UH. Okay, beautiful photograph. Liparis hawaiiensis is the second native species of orchid of Hawaii. So these 2 images were taken by Dr. Carr, who is emeritus professor at UH. Here's one putting up its little inflorescence here. Okay, here you can see that the flowers are kind of small, white and green, or they're actually more green than white. But they're kind of small plants, okay? And the third one, Platanthera holocarla, is actually a rare and endangered species, okay? So this is what they look like, okay? Platanthera holocarla, these 2 photographs taken by John Obata, okay? And these a few years ago were known from only like a handful of hummocks, okay, on one of the islands, and whoever knows where the plants are, they will not tell anybody where they are because they're afraid of people trying to collect them. Okay, this is a rare and endangered plant. Okay, now there are some species of orchids that have become naturalized to Hawaii. That means that they actually been brought here by humans, but they can reproduce themselves in the wild without human help. One of them is a bamboo orchid, Arundina graminifolia. You can see these when you're driving away from Hilo, yeah, heading for the orchid nurseries, like Carmelo orchids, yeah. Arundina graminifolia, the bamboo orchid. Sometimes they'll use the leaves and the stem for greenery in flower arrangements. Okay. Then you have Epidendrum o'brienum. That X in there actually stands for this is a hybrid, okay? So this is one that may have become wild in some places in the islands, okay, an epidendrum. Another species that has become naturalized in Hawaii is a nun's orchid, Orpheus tankervillii, okay? It's kind of has plicate leaves. Here you can see that it sort of looks like the cowl of a nun. Yes, that's why they call it the nun's orchid. Even though the other side of the petals and sepals are actually a brown color, okay, like a habit. And there's Spathoglotis plicata, also known as the Philippine ground orchid. Very familiar to people in Hawaii who has ever gone on a hike in some of the easy trails or areas in the forest that have been cleared, because many of these wild Hawaiian orchids will not actually put out a plant or grow very well unless the area is cleared or a tree falls down in the forest. And then they'll all spring up, and they'll all probably self-pollinate, and then they all make seed. Here it is making seed in this fruit, and then they'll all just kind of continue with their life cycle that way. Now, is that an orchid? Okay, so most people know orchids if they see one, especially in Hawaii where we have lots of dendrobiums, cattleyas, vandas, phalaenopsis, and oncidiums. Okay, here's a dendrobium, here's a cattleya type of orchid, here's a vanda, a nice blue vanda, what we call blue. Okay, a phalaenopsis orchid, and some oncidiums. Okay, you can see some things that are truly characteristic, even though they look very different from each other. All of them have 3 sepals, 3 petals, one of the petals distinguished from the other, called a lip or labellum. Okay, another thing that you'll notice is on the other side of the labellum is a column. Another thing you'll notice about these orchids is that the lip is lowermost in the flower. Okay, that's not always true. Okay. Now, how to identify any orchid? As we said before, the orchid seeds are very small, they're only a few cells large, and they lack an endosperm. Okay, so they're tricky to germinate and grow, unless of course you have a tissue culture lab, then it's easier. But what happens is that they have symbionts in friendly fungi, the mycorrhizas that we talked about earlier. So both parties benefit. Okay, the fungus has some place to live, and the orchid has a fungus to actually help it get food and water. Okay, it's a symbiosis. So how can you distinguish an orchid? You look at the flowers. Okay, 3 sepals, 3 petals. Sepals and 2 petals are similar. 1 petal is different from the other 2, and it's called a labellum or lip, what we talked about a little earlier. Okay, so here we have sepal, 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 petal, petal, and petal. The 3rd petal distinguished from the other one, and the column opposite. Okay. Now for these orchids that we were just looking at, the pedicel or the flower stem twists 180 degrees. Okay. That's called resupination. That's why the lip is lowermost in these flowers. Okay, here you can see the lip is lowermost, so if you actually look at the back, it's actually twisted 180, half twist around. Okay, that's called resupination. So many orchids show this resupination. Okay, now male parts are joined to the female parts in the structure known as a column. The column is opposite the lip. Okay, the pollen is not loose and powdery. It's actually aggregated into packets known as pollinia. Okay, and further down the column is a stigma, which we talked about before. Okay, so here's a nice phalaenopsis orchid. So they have extreme pollinator specificity. Okay, generally in nature, only a single species of animal, usually some kind of insect, does pollination for one species. So that means that orchids are extremely vulnerable to changes in their habitats. Okay, they're among the most threatened of the plant groups in the world. Okay, now after pollination and fertilization, the fruit that develops is called a capsule, and it's dry when it's ripe. Okay, it opens up along 3 or more seams, and it disperses the numerous seeds, which are tens of thousands to millions of seeds. Okay, here are some capsules here on this, looks like a spathoglotis. Okay, some fruits developing. So plant size can range from under an inch high to those with flower spikes of 15 feet. Okay, they can be found from sea level to 14,000 foot elevation. Subarctic regions to the tropics. Of course, they're mostly known from the tropics. And the habitats vary very widely. Okay, they can grow in very dry areas, very wet areas. Okay. So here is actually contrast between a brassavola here on the left and a Dracula. This is Dracula vampira. Okay, so we have a flower that's almost black and a flower that's almost white. Okay, and there every color in between that you can think of. There's even blue orchids. There's like a Disa species that's blue, that is true blue, and there's one called Thalamitra, like Thalamitra from Australia, that's actually blue also. So there are two main orchid groups. You have those that are classified by growth patterns. You have sympodial growth patterns with feet are together. So new growth comes each year from the base of the previous growth from a rhizome. Okay, so you have stems rising from a rhizome. So some examples are dendrobiums, cattleyas, paphiopedilum. So here's a plant really nicely showing a sympodial growth form with a new growth arising from the rhizome that's growing along this branch or this media that it's on. Okay, the other type is called monopodial or one-footed. Okay, one main stem that grows taller and has no rhizome. So some examples of these are Phalaenopsis orchids and Vandas. Okay, Vanda here, monopodial, it just grows up, and Phalaenopsis the same way. Okay, so or they can be grouped by substrates in which they grow. You have the epiphytes that are well known. A lot of the orchids we're looking at today are the ones that grow upon trees. Okay, so oncidiums are an example of those. And then you have terrestrials that have roots growing in the soil. Okay, so paphiopedilums are examples of those. Okay, so there's Paphiopedilum conchobolachulum, beautiful, nearly white Paphiopedilum. I think this one is from Indochina somewhere. Okay. So orchid classification is subject to debate. Okay, because what it is, you have plants are difficult to slot because species, genera, and tribes are hard to delimit because sometimes you can cross between species, between genera, even up to the tribe level. Sometimes you can make hybrids between them. So you have a lack of barriers to hybridization. Okay, so one of the barriers of hybridization is the coevolution between orchids and their pollinators. Okay. Yeah, pollinator specificity is the only condition that prevents cross-pollination in the wild, okay? But this lack of barriers to hybridization is actually a boon, okay? It's a species, boundaries are fluid. So it's actually, so these are all different species of orchid. Here's a dendrobium, here's an oncidium hybrid, dendrobium hybrid, Oncidium hybrid, a Zymbidium hybrid. Okay, so there's a boom to the plant hybridizer. Okay, so most of the orchids that are purchased from greenhouses and florists are actually artificial hybrids, right? So you have Phalaenopses to Zymbidiums to Cattleyas. You can have tens of thousands of hybrids. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go and take a look at a few orchid plants here on the side. Okay. So we have these nice Phalaenopsis orchids that we can take a look at. Okay. So you can see that each of them actually has 1, 2, 3 sepals and 1, 2, 3 petals. The third petal differentiated from the other petal. Okay, this is called the lip or labellum with a column opposite it. Yes. And this other Phalaenopsis orchid also has the same setup, you know, of course. 1, 2, 3 sepals and 1, 2, 3 petals. Okay, with a column opposite the petal known as a lip or labellum. Okay. Now we have these rather poor looking orchids, which I have to say that I dropped the book upon, unfortunately. but I mostly wanted to use them to kind of show a demonstration, okay, of their morphology. Okay, so here we have a flower, dorsal sepal, lateral sepal, petal, petal, petal. The third petal differentiated into the lip. Now take the lip off, just kind of take it off like that, and show the column, which is opposite the lip. Okay, you can actually fold back the sepals here. So you can see that the tip is actually the anther cap. You can take the tip off here, and then here on my forefinger is a pollinium. Okay, the pollinium by a pollinator would actually be then deposited into the stigma, the sticky little concavity that's there. So now this flower, even though it's been mutilated and etc., dissected, is actually now pollinated. Okay, in the natural state, the pollen would then make a pollen tube, send the pollen tube down, down into the ovary, which would be in this area here, in the pedicel, okay, and would form a fruit known as a capsule, okay? Right. Okay, so that's that. You can go back to the computer. And I want to say that this is it. This is the end of the program. Okay, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank all the people who helped with this project, who helped me, definitely, and who did a lot of the work for this project. Okay, all the people here at the EMC. I'd like to thank all the students who tune in and who will watch and who hopefully will learn about plants. So we actually started from people and plants, and at the end of the semester we have plants and civilization, so we have people and plants again. So remember, people need plants, but plants don't necessarily need people. Anyway, so that's the end. Okay, thank you very much, and aloha.